the fact that they won a match is incredible. I don't really know what to say. Like, there's so much drama around this. Like, Scream is flaming his former players. Scream is threatening to go back to only playing duelists, so clearly they're gonna have to make it at least one change to bring it in IGL. He's also threatening to go to CS2. Like, I think the one thing I will say is that throughout all of this, Nevera has been decent, Shin has been decent, everything else about the team is a mess.
A lot of these teams in general are going to make changes, 100%. But it'll be interesting, obviously, for a Turkish team, you know, how much talent is there to, you know, provide like clear upgrades. In this game against Karmine Corp, the first kills to first deaths is what? Plus 20 over 3 maps for Karmine Corp in first kills, first deaths. That's unbelievable!
They need an IGL. They need a new coaching staff. They need somebody to tell Scream to shut the fuck up and play his role and just like be in a system. Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Cosmic Divide. As you can see, TMV is free from the streaming dungeon. I found him behind a bin in southeast London, and I brought him back to his house because we had to do.
Definitely not in southeast London.
We had to do an episode. So if you've been wondering where TMV is, as a fan of his stream, he was scrounging for scraps somewhere in southeast London. Whatever he denies is not true. How's that for an intro?
That was a great intro. Shall we explain what we're doing today? Today we'll be taking a look at the LCQs from all 3 regions. And as it was the last games for a lot of teams, we'll be kind of, you know, briefly touching on all the teams who maybe didn't make it before obviously talking about who won and how we think they'll do. Before we give kind of a very brief preview of champs, but there will be a whole other episode where we, you know, we'll go into depth of, you know, each team at champs, how we think they'll do, all of that stuff. So stay tuned.
Make sure you're subscribed.
That. Yeah, but in this one, we get to talk about Sentinels and 100 Thieves and, you know, Karmine Corp and these, you know, big orgs who didn't make it. So we're going to start with EMEA. And we're going to, I think probably the most logical way of doing it is going from, you know, who got knocked out first to, you know, who made it to the end. So let's start, and we're just going to be pretty brief with, you know, the teams who didn't make it too far. Go on.
Quick question before we actually get into the teams. What did you think about the format of the LCQ? Was it good?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I kind of liked it, to be honest. I liked that the group stages mattered.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's good. Obviously this year was kind of weird, but obviously particularly for Pacific and Americas, because you got 7 teams, and coming up with a 7-team bracket is going to be difficult no matter what you do. It's always going to be weird. So I thought the way they handled it was probably the best. Next year, though, there'll be 8 teams in the LCQ. So I feel like probably because we're going to add a team each year, it'll probably shift and change. Like next year, there's 8 teams in LCQ, so they'll probably just do a normal bracket, I would have thought. You know,
yeah, maybe. I guess
like
so.
I think, yeah, don't get too stuck up on like, oh, this was a great format, I want it back, because you're probably not going to get it because it's going to change. Unlucky, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, I think it had the right amount of BO, or it had the right amount of like second lives, right? Because there was lower bracket for part of it, but I don't think we necessarily needed to give Detonation and Talon extra shots, stuff like that. No offense to those teams, but realistically, they weren't going to improve their stock if they played more games, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay, so with that said, let's dive in to EMEA, which will be our first region, and let's kick off with a team that actually did make a change already for LCQ, and that's Team Heretics, who, as the year went on, what was their record in the league season? It wasn't good.
No.
They won what?
2
games?
Yep.
So they won 2 games. They lose to Koi in the first game, and as you say, get knocked out straight away. What do you think of Team Heretics? What's going on with them? How many changes will they make? Let's keep it brief.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously the change that they made coming into this, there was like the weird kind of Zeke exception where they were able to change out a player even though no other team could. They brought in Benji Fishy. I love Fortnite, and I wouldn't say there was like crazy expectations for him, but I think he performed relatively well. He like top fragged in one of the games. He's a Sentinel player. We watched him quite a bit because he played against Acend a bunch during the Ascension League. And I think both you and I thought he was like a pretty decent player. Certainly has good mechanics, definitely kind of raw as a player. But yeah, then we just basically saw like more Heretic stuff, which is just wild inconsistencies, like crazy role switches. I mean, Mixwell played Viper, and then he played Yoru, and then he was playing Breach, and it's like, okay, if things are this all over the place at this point in the season, clearly there's just like some internal issues about how this team is thinking about the game and where their players are supposed to be. I'm all for flexibility in players, but when you have one of your longest tenured players playing 3 different roles in the span of one best of 3, it's probably not a good sign. So this team, I think, will make a lot of changes. I am hesitant to say they will completely rebuild the team, but I think we'll see a minimum of 3 different players on this team next year.
Yeah, I completely agree. And as I said, we're not going to spend too much time on all of these teams because otherwise we'd be here forever. So let's move on to BBL, who I'm going to be honest, I kind of thought would do better. I thought that they would beat Karmine Corp. And I know it was not like a complete blowout or whatever. Went to overtime on the last map there. Obviously a crazy ending to that one, but I'm a little disappointed in BBL, and I think here's another team that obviously a lot of the teams who, a lot of these teams in general are going to make changes, 100%. But it'll be interesting, obviously, for a Turkish team, how much talent is there to, provide like clear upgrades. But, particularly when you compare BBL to, how FUT are doing, and, for they're at champs and they made Tokyo, and, they seem to be on a kind of, a rise essentially, and, they have, a decent chance at champs considering the group they got as well. Like, compare that to BBL, they're kind of on the other end of the spectrum where it just feels like now they're just in FUT's shadow, right? And and that's not a great place to be. And I'm sure that they won't want to be either. So I can definitely again see this team making some changes overall. To me, it was always a map pool problem. They're good on Acend. They could beat anyone on Acend, genuinely. Yep. But other than that, they've just always struggled to find like other maps where they're comfortable and clearly like have it. In this game against Karmine Corp, the first kills to first deaths is what +20 over 3 maps for Karmine Corp in first kills first deaths. That's unbelievable.
Not good.
+20 in 3 maps. That is absolutely crazy. And it was still a close game, which goes to show that they should have won this game. And I'm sure they're desperately disappointed that they didn't win this game. But that's the way it is.
And the crazy thing about BBL before we move on to the next team is just that they kind of had that weird mid-season resurgence where it was like, this team is actually maybe kind of good.
They changed their coach, and then they got good for a couple weeks.
Not that they beat any like crazy good teams, but there was sort of like this momentum all of a sudden. We're like, okay, teams were giving them Ascent all the time. Yeah. But also they looked like a competent team, and I think both you and I at one point were like, oh, maybe this will be the last team into LCQ.
Because they started 0-4 and then made a coaching change and then started winning a couple games. It was like, and they were close in those first games, so it wasn't like blowouts. So it was like, this is like, they're kind of like, it's kind of like they seem like they would do what Crew did in LCQ, right? Like, they're close, they're not that far away, but then it just kind of petered out. And unfortunate, I guess. So let's move on to our next team.
How many changes? How many changes would you say?
How many changes for BBL? I'm going to say 2.
2, okay.
I would say 2. Now, our next team is Karmine Corp, who did win against BBL, but then lost to Giants and then lost to NAVI in the lower round 1. What do you think of Karmine Corp?
I mean, what is there to say about this team that hasn't already been said? I mean, the fact that they won a match is incredible, I guess. I don't really know. I don't really know what to say. Like, there's so much drama around this. Like, Scream is flaming his former players. Like, there's clearly massive issues with how the team is run. They still don't have like a real IGL. Scream is threatening to go back to only playing duelists, so clearly they're gonna have to make it at least one change to bring in an IGL. He's also threatening to go to CS2. Like, I think the one thing I will say is that throughout all of this, Navera has been decent, Shin has been decent, and then Everything else about this team is a mess. Also, shout out to Zaysh for stepping in as an assistant coach and playing, not to the level of tier 1 players, but enough to get them into LCQ and win a game. They need an IGL. They need a new coaching staff. They need somebody to tell Scream to shut the fuck up and play his role and just like be in a system. I mean, this team needs structure. Like their structure is bad. Their structure is bad. They need a coach to tell people what to do.
I don't know if you watched the interview before Karmine Corp's game. I can't remember who it was against. But before one of their games on the EMEA broadcast, there was an interview with PM, the coach of Karmine Corp. And they asked him, like, oh, I heard Scream's IGLing again. Like, how did that come about? And his answer was, well, Scream said he wanted to be the IGL again.
Right.
So he is.
Right.
And the way he spoke about it and and then he was like, and so that meant that we tried no duelist again because that's how Scream wants to play, but then it didn't work. So we, put Scream back on duelist again because, it didn't work again. And just the way you could see the way he was speaking. You say they need a coaching staff change. I'm not actually sure that's that true. I think PM, he's been on the broadcast as well a couple of times. I think the way he speaks, he's clearly very knowledgeable. I almost wonder if his hands have been tied behind his back, that he's just not had the level of control that he needs to have a positive impact on this team.
Yeah.
So
I guess there is one thing that's always has kind of pervaded esports, which is players tend to have more control over the team than they should, especially over coaches. And a lot of times, as a coach, if you tell the player what to do, they will fire you. Like the player will fire you, basically. So.
That's what it feels like in this team. You're all, like, it feels like PM, the way he was speaking was he's almost like having to just indulge Scream in terms of, well, we're paying him the big bucks, so he's gonna say he's the leader of this team, not you. And that's a difficult situation. Now we'll see what happens in the future. I mean, Zaysh is gonna obviously be replaced, right? Like that's a
player. I mean,
he might be a coach again, but as a player, he's gonna get replaced almost certainly.
Yeah.
And maybe XMS will as well. I think, to be honest, I think that's
he was
a fairly decent chance. And then they have a choice, really. I mean, the thing is, if Scream does go to another game, what happens to Navera? Right? Does Navera just stay with Scream? Does he just stick around with Karmine Corp? Like, or if they get rid of Scream, would Navera ever stay? I honestly do not know. So to me, Karmine Corp could go quite a few different ways where either they completely blow up and they just say, that wasn't good enough. We're going to look for elsewhere.
Sign Apex.
Or they, kind of maybe, bring in Enzo, right, to be the full-time IGL. Let Enzo and PM maybe take over the team and just start from there and, kind of keep Scream Navera, but, maybe hand over the reins to Enzo instead. But we'll have to see, I guess.
All right, guys, we got to take a quick break to talk about your aim because it stinks, and our sponsor Nifter wants to help you out. They just dropped the sleekest sleeve in the game, and I want you to slap one of these bad boys on your aiming arm to get that smooth, silky glide across your mousepad. We're talking frictionless flicks and tension-free tracking. The Nifter sleeve comes in whatever size you need to guarantee a skin-tight feel with material that is both sweat-wicking and seamless for a no-chafe experience. Trust me, nobody wants to duo queue with a swampy, nerd sweat elbow having sticking to their desk ass duelist. Nobody. Get the Nifter gaming arm sleeve using the link in the description below and use code ACEND10, that's ACEND10 for 10% off at checkout. Now back to the episode.
Other team from EMEA who did not make it was Koi. And Koi got very close. They managed to beat Team Heretics. They then beat NAVI.
Yep.
But then they lost in the upper final to Giants, and then they lost 3-0 in the lower final as well to Koi, and Barbar was not happy. So let's talk about Koi. And to me, particularly when Koi beat NAVI, I thought that this is the Koi that was promised. right?
Right.
This is the Koi when at the start of the season you looked at the roster, you went, okay, Shados, very good player. Trex, very good player. Starkso has, won champs.
Yep.
So, it can be a very good player. Sometimes maybe a bit inconsistent, but can be a very good player.
Yep.
Coldamenta, solid IGL, experienced IGL. And then Wolfen was a bit of the unknown.
But he was playing consistently in their first couple of games, it seemed like. He was like,
Wolfen,
yeah,
a bit of an unknown, but still, okay. I look at that team on paper, I think that's a good team.
right.
And then they just absolutely played awfully throughout the regular season. And I honestly do, I would almost like to see what was going on inside that building because, like, you look at the players and it's like you should be at least making top 6. Like, you shouldn't be making playoffs at least. When I look at these players in this team, so I would love to know what was going wrong because there must have been a lot going wrong behind the scenes. And now they've ended up where it looked like, oh yeah, we're gonna make the champs, and then we keep this team together, and then next year we start this run, and we'll be fine. But now it's like, what do they do?
Right.
Because to me, you could argue that Koi, they're a Spanish org. Coldamenta's their only Spanish player. But do they need a change of system? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to know without knowing the internals, but the way that they functioned this year leads me to believe that there was just like vastly different ideas of how they wanted to play the game, conflicting for like what they were doing. And both you and I know that Starkso is a fairly outspoken player about how he wants to play the game. That kind of seemingly caused problems with the old Acend roster. Whether is him clashing with Zeke or Bone Cold, we don't really know. But there was definitely some issues that way. I would assume, I mean, this is just complete speculation, but to me, it seems like Shados and Trex are kind of like, we'll just do what you tell us to do. They seem kind of to be like those types of players. I would assume Wolfen is kind of like just happy to be here. Like, to be honest, he's definitely has potential to be a good player, but he's not the same caliber of name brand that these other players are. And then there's Coldamenta, who has been in charge of a lot of teams in the past. And then there's Barbar, who seemingly was kind of like the general of Guild. And so there's got to be something that, again, complete speculation, there's got to be something between the three of Starkso, Coldamenta, and Barbar, in my opinion, that is not clicking together. So some of those parties are going to either have to, give up the control that they want, or they're going to have to go. I expect Wolfen to kind of be one of the fall guys for this team. I think he will get replaced, even though maybe he could become a very good player with a bit more coaching. I really hope they hold on to Trex and Shados, because I think that is like the core of the team that was consistent throughout. It would be very hard for them to replace their only Spanish player. I would imagine they have to keep some sort of Spaniard on this team, but I would imagine that Coldamenta is probably the next on the chopping block, and Starkso is probably not safe either.
Yeah, I could see that. And look, knowing what we know now about how good Safe is, how good Leo is.
Yeah.
When you look back at that old Guild roster, and Trex is a very good player as well.
Yeah.
And they only made one international tournament. Yeah. It does make you go, did everyone just kind of overrate Coldamenta and Barbar back in the day? Right, when Guild were like getting close, and it's like, oh, they're a close team, they're a good team. Hey, Guild, this, who the hell are Guild, right? Like,
right.
But was it that they should have just been making every single tournament anyway? And that really, you always make an interesting point. I think whenever we talk about Paper X, that you feel like teams are playing CS sometimes, and some teams, I think Koi are the most CS team. Like,
interesting.
I think that they. Just some of the things that they do, it just feels like if you just shifted it somehow, you could be a lot better. Like, again, I don't understand how this team has done so poorly. It doesn't really make sense. And when we go back to Guild and look, like, Leo's like legit one of, if not the best player in the world.
Right.
Safe is like a top 10 player in the world. Like. How are you not even making international events? Like, forget winning them. Just make them. How are you not even making them? Right? Like, when you've got that level on your team, like, that's insane. And so Yeah, I think big questions needs to be asked. But as you say, if this wasn't a Spanish org, I'd be like, they're getting rid of Coldamentor and Baba. They're starting over with the new coaching staff in IGL and, you know, building it from the ground up. But because it is a Spanish org, we'll have to see, I guess. But let's go from the
Get
negative.
Mixwell. He'll solve things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, then Heretics need to get a Spanish player as well. Swap them. Swap
Yeah.
Coldamentor and Mixwell. There we go. And they just keep going back and forth every single year. Okay, moving on to the team, an interesting team again, NAVI.
I don't want to talk about
who
NAVI.
have managed to make it. So we're getting to the teams now that have made champs, which makes it a lot less likely, I think, that they will make changes. But NAVI actually could be a team, depending on how they do at champs. And some say that, you know, they haven't got an easy group. What do you think of NAVI? Because even though they did make it, it wasn't convincing. They lost a Koi, they lost a map to Karmine Corp, and then they got, okay, the grand final was a bit of a show match, let's be real. But they did still lose. Yeah, they did still lose 3-0. So what has happened to everyone? Keeps asking this question. What has happened to Navi? And considering the group that they've got, most people I think will have Navi going out straight away. And if that does happen, what happens to Navi?
Yeah, I mean, I am like 90% sure that CNET is going to get replaced, regardless of what happens. Like maybe
CNET is a high likelihood, I think.
Yeah, maybe even if this team has like a good champions showing, I still think they're going to replace CNET. This team has looked so like off balance in how they're playing the game for the entire season, where CNET is doing something and the rest of the team is doing something else. They seem to kind of play, they're like trying to play a tempo, and then CNET is doing something faster or slower than they want him to be doing. I mean, I was memeing about Angel dying so much. It's been a meme forever, but it was really, really clear in this one. Like, he was clearly entering for his team on purpose, and that leads me to believe that it's because he doesn't trust CNED to do that, maybe. And Zipan has never been the entry player for the team, except kind of on Raze. I don't know. It's so hard for me to believe that this team is going to make a lot of changes, because I just don't know who they would get that's better. Like, are you really going to replace Xiao? Are you really going to replace Segetsu? Are you really going to replace Zipan? No. And Angel and Doom Bros is kind of like this 1-2 punch that's kind of been together forever. So I can't imagine that either one of them gets replaced. I don't think that they're having problems with each other. You know, they seem to be a unit. So it leads me to believe that it's got to be CNED, but it's crazy that one player can make such a big difference in terms of how the team functions. And I guess my question for you is, how much of this is them just not having synergy this year, and how much of it is teams kind of like learning how to play against them?
I think it is more the synergy thing, to be honest. I think Navi's system and like their approach to the game, I quite like their approach to the game. But I think it's a very difficult system to pick up. I think it's a very, like, being this kind of, we can play any comp and we'll play any map, and you know, we're just going to be so unpredictable that you'll never know what's coming, and you know, we're going to throw so many different things at you. That's difficult for players, I think, to be in, essentially, because they, you know, CNET's playing Omen, and then he's playing Jet, and then this week you're playing Sage, and then this week, and I think for a lot of players, that's just not possible, right? A lot of players need that structure. They need that stability of, I'm playing, you know, this role on this map all the time. We are picking this map if it's open. Like, you know, a lot of players will just need that, because that's how they've been in every other team they've ever been in. You know, that's the way it is. I don't think the Navi's approach is bad. I like being unpredictable. In fact, I think for the way that the regular season plays out, I think that they have the best approach. I think being unpredictable when teams have, you know, 5 days to anti-strat you is good. I think it works less well when, you know, you're talking about like tournaments, you know, where you have a game every day or every other day and teams don't have a lot of time to anti-strat you. Then I feel like it's better to just be good at what you're good at, like Fnatic. So it's, to me, I would expect them to bring someone else in, and I think they will have learned from this Navi, Doom Bros, and Angel that whoever they bring in, if they do, things don't go well, and let's say they do replace CNED, I'm pretty sure that whoever they'll bring in will be someone who can play a ton of different roles. That it won't be someone who's literally known for playing one agent.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
I think that if they do go that way, that will be the case. But also, I think one thing that people are kind of, and people don't like to say this because it doesn't feel like, it's not like a nice response. You want something to be so clear and obvious that things are wrong, but just their individual player form is worse. Like,
Yeah.
you watch like Shao or Sugetsu. Sugetsu will hit a nasty 3K every so often, but they'll lose 1v1s that they never would have lost last year.
Right.
But that's just them playing worse. There's nothing you can coach really around that. It's just kind of they're just not in as good form, and their form is still good enough to make tournaments. So it's not like they're this god awful team. They're still better than most teams, but it's just I think it's just a combination of. And maybe because they are in a bit of bad form, and maybe because the synergy hasn't quite been there this year, maybe that has led them to, maybe lose a bit of confidence in stuff that they're doing. But then again, I mean, you look at their Lotus comp, and it's they're still playing a crazy comp. So maybe the players are still doing whatever. And look, I don't mind crazy comps. I think, again, if you got a supercomputer like in chess to play Valorant and say what's the best comp, I'm sure that all of the meta comps on all of the maps would be so wrong, and the supercomputer would, do something so crazy with comps, and we'd be scratching our head going, what on earth is going on? So I don't mind
4 smokes and a KO or something
like
that.
It would be so ridiculous. It would be like no smokes, all initiators, it turns out that that's the right way to play the game. That's what it would be. And people would be like, no way. But so I don't have the problem with bad comps or weird comps, let's say. But I think that CNED maybe doesn't fit their structure. And even Angel at the start of the year, by the way, did mention that CNED was making a lot of mistakes early on. Right. And perhaps they were trying to accommodate CNED early on. Right. And understanding that, he's not going to pick this up straight away. And that's when they were better. Right. Lock-in, they finished 3rd, 4th. So.
Right. Yeah, I mean, another thing to think about is when you're in this team where you're a core of 4 players that's been together for a long time, coming in as the outside player, it requires a very specific type of personality. And CNED, he always seems like a very kind of quiet person.
Yeah, by all accounts.
I don't really know how he is necessarily, but he seems like a very quiet person. Maybe his comms are not that frequent. I think if you're coming in as the outsider, you need to be a very confident person, because all the time you're going to know, even if they're not explicitly making you feel like this, you're going to know that you're kind of the odd one out. If you're not doing well, it's probably because you're the change, right?
Yeah,
to some extent.
Yeah.
So you got to pick somebody who's really believes in themselves and is going to be able to just kind of deal with coming in as an outsider for sure.
Yeah. But then again, they make champs. Maybe who knows? Maybe they win champs, and unlikelier things have happened. I mean, Crew just won LCQ, so literally you don't know what's going to happen. But let's move on to our final EMEA team, which is Giants Gaming, who are coming in on, I think, probably on a bit of a high point. This was another team that if they bombed out in LCQ, I would have been like, yeah, they're making 3 changes. They're keeping Nookie. They'll maybe keep Putty and Cloud, and then everyone else, you're gone. But now it's now they probably feel like, oh no, yeah, we could probably maybe run this back, even if they don't do that well, right? I think even if they bomb out, don't get out of groups, I could still maybe see this team, sticking together and feeling it was a process, right? We kind of slowly got better, and we got there at the end of the year. And we'll believe in for next year. But what do you think of Giants? They did manage to win the whole thing. Where do you think this team's going?
I'm going to give a boring answer for a boring team. I think they're going to do very kind of low to mid average at champs, somewhere between, I don't know, 12th and 8th, I suppose, somewhere in there.
G2 successor team.
And then they will probably make maybe a change.
Ooh.
maybe they'll look at somebody for either Fatino or Hoodie potentially. I don't think Nookie's going anywhere. I don't think Cloud's going anywhere, and I don't really think Rhyme is going anywhere either. I just think they're, I don't know, they're a weird team. It's like they're fairly consistent, but then they just don't have like quite enough to get them over the better teams. And I don't
They're
know
just
whether
solidly good.
yeah, I don't know whether the thing that's keeping them back is that their strategies aren't quite good enough, whether their consistency is not quite good enough. It's like they're consistent but not quite consistent enough. They have enough firepower but not quite enough firepower. Like there's really nothing to say other than this team is just like consistently just above average. Like,
they literally are. I mean, you know, Pipson and Nookie have, you know, and Hoodie have come from G2. They are just the successor team to G2.
Yeah.
A good team that's not great and never looks like it will be great. Right? Like, they'll get to tournaments. They will do pretty well. You know, next year in the league season, I would bet that they finish in the top 6. You know, they'll make playoffs. 100%. Will they go to a Masters tournament? Maybe they'll sneak in, right? Maybe they'll get like
if Fnatic gets some extra slot again.
Yeah, Fnatic gets some extra. Well, we'll see if that happens next year. But yeah, like maybe they'll sneak in. Will they do much at an international tournament? Probably not. And that's just who they are, right? And that's what G2 was before in the EMEA. You know, just like a good team, but not a top team.
Until they prove otherwise, that's where they will remain, basically.
Yeah, basically. And to be a top team, they probably do need like 2-3 changes of like, you know, bringing in someone who's, you know, a couple players who are just like insane, right? Who probably we don't even know of yet, because I have no idea who they could bring in that would be the case, but I'm sure those players do exist. They're just, you know, the unknowns in probably tier 2 and maybe even tier 3, as we've seen from some places. But that's the MEA. Let's move on.
Before we move on, real quick, let's just give our predictions of which team from EMEA will have the better champions.
Oh God, that's hard.
Actually, you know what? We'll save that till that. We'll wait till we go through all the LCQ teams.
Okay. That's still a hard question though between those two teams. But anyway, let's move on to our next region then, which is Pacific. And again, we'll start at the bottom, and I'm just going to let you talk because this team is on TMV timeout, and I was probably since about like week 4, I'm going to say, where I've watched a lot of Valorant this year, and I feel confident in pretty much my takes of every single team outside of Detonation, because I did kind of refuse to watch their games. So go ahead, talk to me about Detonation. They lose 2-0 in the first game against Talon. They go home, and they are the only team that did not win a single game.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I didn't watch this game because I knew they were going to lose, and I didn't really care. That being said, having watched many of their games this year, I feel like this team needs to... This is going to sound so harsh. I don't want to be too mean to Japanese players and Japanese fans, but they need to get rid of Reita. And they need to probably get rid of almost all of their Japanese players. I feel like Reita and Takage have kind of been like a package deal since the beginning of Japanese Valorant back in like ZETA Division. They've always been very, very average. I think Takage has shown glimpses of being like a very cracked aimer, decision making okay. He's always kind of been like one of those players that I think could be good. Reita has never struck me as a very good player, and he keeps getting opportunities on these teams, probably because he's kind of like a tenured player. I don't know. He's also like one of the only IGLs, I think, in Japan that has been rated. And then, you know, Anthem and Zinfree. Zinfree was fine on Northeption. He was kind of like a standout player. Anthem, I mean, he played tier 2 Japanese Valorant, which is very, very bad in general. And Suggest was a player that, again, kind of like Takage, had a lot of promise, really good mechanics, has been on kind of average to bad teams, and I don't know, it's like this, I feel like this is more like a systemic thing where they need just an actual like coaching structure team that is going to just teach them how to play the game correctly, because they just don't play the game correctly. Like in all sense of the word, they're playing Counter-Strike with abilities. It's not good Counter-Strike. Their ability usage is terrible, and their overall way of playing Valorant is just not correct. So they need to start over, and probably they shouldn't start with any of the players that they have on their team other than maybe the 2 Koreans, Suggest and Soldem.
Yeah, I'm all for just scrapping it. Just restart. Just completely restart. Forget this ever happened.
Yeah.
The problem for me for Detonation is that, if you replace Detonation with Scars, right, who are the Japanese tier 2 team, the best Japanese tier 2 team, Scars would have won at least a couple games, I would have thought. In a Pacific League that's kind of, I would say a lot of these teams are pretty inconsistent in the Pacific League. Scars, I think, would have won multiple games.
Yeah.
This team, I think if you put this team into the tier 2 Japanese scene,
and they would still be bad.
They would be a mid tier 2 team.
Yeah, I agree.
So that just tells you that there's more to be. There's more to do out there, right? There's just better teams to get. And as you say, like, it was interesting. I can't remember who it was. I think maybe it was someone on Plat Chat. Was saying that, like, the Japanese viewership is really high, but the Japanese player base isn't that big.
Right.
And that came as a surprise to me as well, because you just think, like, oh, high viewership, high player base, there must be good Japanese players out there. But if it is just a spectator sport in Japan, then I feel like, like, Japanese fans, they're probably still going to support this team. You may need one Japanese player, like the Spanish orgs do, right? Like, oh, well, we need one Spanish player, but they only have one Spanish player, right? Like, I feel like that might be the direction that you need to go here, where you get, an English-speaking roster, import a player if you have to, and just go from there, and just rework it, and it'll be okay. Right, like,
right.
And do well, because people like when you win, right? Like, that's a big thing. Winning, people like winning, And if Detonation, won like the Pacific League, and then with getting deep into tournaments, there'd be a lot of Japanese fans supporting you, whether you had 1 or 5 Japanese players, they'd be supporting.
I mean, we saw it at Masters Tokyo, where, like, just the Pacific team was the most loved team in general.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't really matter. And Fnatic was loved. Now, that being said, if there's no Japanese players at any events, the player base, like, the viewership will drop. Like, you can't.
That's why you got the ZETA Division to make it the champs, because we're there. We're there. We got it. Don't
Truly
worry
a
about
one-team region.
Riot has been saved by ZETA Division again. We've done it. Could have drawn them an easier group, though. Anyway, Detonation, scrap it, figure it out, get back to us in 2023. God, time moves fast.
Maybe they need another year, 2025.
Okay. Let's talk about the team that they played in that first game then. Another huge disappointment, and another team that I assume changes are coming, and that's Talon Esports, who, after lock-in, Mike, what happened at lock-in? Like, what happened in between lock-in and the start of the Pacific season? Because Talon were good. Like, it's crazy. Go back and watch Talon versus EG.
They played with so much confidence at lock-in, I feel like.
Go and watch Talon destroy EG, and just your mind will be boggled. What's going on? Because of where those two teams are right now. But yeah, like, they looked legitimately good. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, I mean, they had some crazy ideas. They were doing some nice things, but it was like, it's like they were a very aggressive team, but it looked like, a lot of people said when Paper Rex went out and Talon were doing well, oh, this is the new Paper Rex, right? This is like the successor story to Paper Rex.
I don't think I ever would have said that.
Oh, those people saying it. A lot of people saying it. Because people thought that, oh, well, Paper X are stagnating. They aren't doing too well. They didn't look good. But Talon, did look good at lock-in. So it's just crazy that we're here at this point where they can barely win a game. And so, I assume massive changes are coming.
I'm going to yell about Talon for a second.
Go on.
So I was listening to an interview with Ye recently, and he was talking about their match against, when it was Xersha or X10.
Yep.
And he was just talking about, like, the Asian teams in general and how they are just, like, very, very prone to just doing the unexpected and just like dry swinging you through smokes and stuff like that.
Yep.
And it can be really hard to deal with. And to me, that kind of like embodies Talon, is that they're just a team that is going to do the bad plays, and sometimes those bad plays will work. And I think that might be why you were overrating them a little bit after lock-in, is because they were making these bad plays on a timing and it was working for those few games, and then it just stopped working. Because inherently, if you're doing inconsistent things, like if your win condition is to do something that is like a 50-50 chance or like a 40-60 chance of working, inherently you're going to lose a lot because it's not going to work well. You know, if you have an execute like DRX to take the C site in Haven that's like unstoppable, you have like a 90% chance that it works if you just use your utility. Talon's plays are all like, I don't know, is this gonna work? Is Cruz gonna somehow like walk out blind and then just like spray 3 people by accident almost? Yeah, sometimes it's gonna happen, and other times it's gonna look awful. And I think that's why we see these like crazy peaks and valleys for this team, is that their inherent play style and the way that they view the game, the way that they play the game, the plays that they make are just so high risk, high reward, that sometimes when they all work and they're playing with confidence, it's like, oh my God, this team's crazy. How would you ever do this? How would you beat this team? But then a lot of times people just like shoot back and then they look awful. That's my view of Talon. And I agree, there probably are changes coming, but I don't know the Thai scene very well. There's got to be some other good players. I'm pretty sure the Thai player base is pretty big. I think like relative to the size of the country, I think there's like quite a few Thai players, but I think that these guys have a lot of skill. Like Patapan's good, Jip Boys was good, Garnet's is good, Foxy's always been pretty consistent, Cruz is crazy. He has the capacity to make good plays, but I don't know. I don't know who you would get necessarily. But
yeah,
I guess one last thing I'll say is that Talon as an org, I think is based in Singapore. I'm pretty sure the org is like a Singaporean org. So they're not really tied to being in Thailand if they don't want to be.
So what I'm getting from your point is you just think that, okay, they do have good players, they just need maybe a more structured approach. They need a more sensible approach. Because that's interesting, because they did bring in Boy, who used to play for 100 Thieves,
right,
to come in and be a coach. So maybe that is like maybe that's like an example of, okay, yeah, they're gonna dial it back. They're gonna, go back to maybe, playing a more sort of standard approach overall, and won't be, going crazy all the time. And because that's the thing, like Xersha and X10, like they were a bit crazy, but I never got the impression they weren't paper Rex crazy, right?
yeah,
They were they were like normal APAC, like, a bit chaotic, but they
right.
weren't like some of the I mean, playing triple duelist obviously is like the big example.
That was
They weren't,
straight trolling.
yeah, they weren't like that, right? They weren't
Yeah,
like just seemingly throwing stuff at the wall to kind of like lean into it, like, oh, look at how crazy we are, guys. So yeah, I think maybe they'll make changes, but as you say, like I feel like, a lot of these players, and I think to me what when you're saying like I overrated them, I think to me what made me think like they have a chance is that the 2 players that I didn't know about, Jip Boys and Garnets, at lock-in looked
good.
good.
Yeah,
And I was like, oh, they found like some good players. Like, okay, like, I know the other players are like, decent players, they've been to international tournaments before, but then you add in like some other good players, like, okay, we got something cooking here. But not to be for Talon, an interesting team to see what they will do next, though. But let's move on to another team that will be interesting to see what they do next. Global Esports. Now, Global Esports played 1 game, lost to RRQ, and then that's it. And this will be very interesting to see what they do next, because I could see. I mean, I'd be surprised if they got rid of Monette, because it looks like he's just a very good player.
Yep.
So it feels like, don't change that. But then everyone else, just because of how weird this roster is, right? How many like different, people have been thrown in there and all of that. Like, I don't know. Will they? I could see everyone else leaving. However, I do think, I know SK Rossi had a bad game. I think they should keep SK Rossi. Now, maybe he doesn't play full-time Jet, right? I think actually might help him if he didn't. And you put him on some other roles so that he isn't, like when you're the duelist and you've got, you're representing like literally 1 billion people,
Right.
almost 2 billion people. Like when you're that guy and, you're the duelist. And so therefore you're expected to frag, and if you come bottom of the scoreboard, if you don't come top of the scoreboard, everyone's looking at you and being like, well, why are you not at the top of the scoreboard?
Right.
I feel like it would help. I think they should keep it because, again, I think it's good for the scene. I think it's who you are and what you represent. I think that matters, right?
Yep.
And I think that therefore they should keep him around, but maybe just change him off duelist so that he doesn't have that added pressure, right? Put him on Sentinel or something. I know that, he's quite an aggressive player, but initiate a Sentinel, right? Something where, if you don't top frag, it's fine, right? Like, people won't talk about it all the time.
Didn't he have a decent showing on KO at lock-in? Wasn't his KO okay? If I remember correctly. Like they had him playing KO at lock-in, I think.
Yeah, it rung a bell as well. Yeah, so just put him on Initiator or something, have him play Sky, KO, those kind of things, and hope that that's okay. I'm interested to see what you think as a North American. What's going to happen with Aaron? Do you think they'll keep him around or not? And then you've got the 2 Koreans as well, where it's like, they're decent players. They're tier 1 players, probably.
Maybe.
But again, it's just such a weird roster that maybe you just change it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's so... Like, and then they have 4 players or 4 people on their coaching staff from different places also. I mean, from all, like, what I've heard is, Aaron is a good leader. He was, like, a good influence on the players. People seem to praise him very highly. His performance was not good this year. As, like, his individual performance, it was not good. We know that on Acend he was co-calling with Def, and so probably having to step in as like the full-time leader was probably difficult. That being said, that is the type of role where if you give them more time, they generally will get better at it because he's going to come into next year having made a lot of mistakes this year and know how to do things better. Again, it's I think it's always going to come down to the IGL problem. Like, who are the IGLs in Pacific that you would replace him with? I don't really know. I'm not that tapped into the tier 2 scene in the Pacific region. I'm sure that people in the comments will give us some suggestions, but this to me does seem like a team that needs to hone in on their identity and then just like commit to doing that for a while, because remember they started the year with like 8 people on their roster. Was it 10 people? I can't remember. There's a lot of people on their roster.
It wasn't the full 10, but it was 7 or 8, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of people on their roster. They had Ronsky, who was like their full-time KO one-trick player, and then he just decided that he didn't want to do esports anymore and retired halfway through the season. And like clearly there was a ton of like upheaval in this team throughout the course of the year. And it leads me to believe that it is a team that if you can just kind of like come up with an idea and then just do that idea for an extended period of time, you probably are going to see better results than you did this year. Because I don't think at any point you looked at this team and were like, this team is awful. It was always just, this team is like below average, but not that much, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting team to figure out what they're gonna do because there's so many different things they could do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I'm really interested. When I was thinking about what if they do let go of Aaron, like, and you were talking about who they're gonna pick up, I was thinking, I'm wondering if Paper Rex are gonna start a bit of a mini revolution in terms of coming up with a team that doesn't have a full IGL, and you just have 3 to 4 players who can chip in.
Apparently that's what ZETA was doing during LCQ.
Yeah, that's what people have been saying, that ZETA have gone to this Sugar Zero, Laz, and Crow all kind of just call when needed thing. I wonder if that's going to start a full-on revolution of that's the way that maybe this game is too chaotic for a full-time IGL, right? Maybe you just need firepower, and you just realize that the game is better played when everyone can just kind of chip in and make calls on their own rather than having, full set. Everyone has an idea. I honestly think that could happen. I wouldn't even be shocked if it did. But yeah, Global are an interesting team to see where they go next. But talking about teams who were maybe a bit of a disappointment, and specifically a team that let me down, GenG.
Okay.
Because GenG I picked to win the whole thing. I was that one guy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, I guess we skipped over RRQ. We'll go to RRQ first because they got eliminated first, I guess. RRQ. Another interesting team, I think, in terms of what they'll do, because RRQ, I think a lot of people, thought that they were starting from the basement and definitely got better. I think, credit to Ewok and the coaching staff. Like, you could definitely see there was a definite improvement as the year went on. And so it's kind of that's always an interesting one where you're kind of like, well, we did improve, so if we keep going with it, will we keep improving, or do we need to make changes? I've always been of the opinion that if you are that kind of team where, you were starting from the bottom, you started to improve, but then, you're wondering whether you should stick with it or not. Probably for them, I think making a change, maybe 2 changes, would be best, right? Just try and bring in, if you can, find someone, who's maybe just got that bit of extra something from somewhere, and then, hoping that you can continue that steady path of improvement and get that little bit of boost that could take you, from whatever RQ are the 7th best team to like, the 4th, the 3rd best team. And all of a sudden, 3rd best team, you're making, events.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's really important to remember is that they lost a 19-21 map to ZETA Division
Yes.
in the upper round, where Deb had to drop 42 kills on Sova to pull them over the line. And ZETA went on to win the LCQ, obviously. So that's one of those losses that is going to be tough to come back from. And they still came back and they played a relatively, I guess it wasn't that close against GenG. They got kind of slammed on 2 of the maps. But yeah, I don't know. And then there was the kind of like the drama around Flipsider with his interaction with people going into this. There was definitely some chaos around this team. But I think you're right. This is one of those teams that came in with very low expectations. People were flaming the org. People were flaming the roster. And then they ended up showing good improvement throughout the year. I feel like it's one of those situations where you kind of just need to like cook the stew a little bit longer, maybe. I think you're right. Maybe a change is fine, but you definitely do not want to restart because I think you're going in the right direction.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, let's move on to the team that disappointed me then, GenG, who I think we might have a different opinion on in terms of, sticking with it for RRQ, maybe not so much for GenG, because holy, when oh my god, this team, GenG. And what was it? It was their first game against Talon of this LCQ. Their first half on Pearl, they go up 9-3, and some of the things that they were doing, I was like, that GenG that started out the start of the year, they're back. Because they were just doing some really nice stuff, right? Like flash timings. I've never seen a Gecko get as many dizzy flashes. There's no way anyone has more dizzy flashes than that in a pro game and a half. Every single dizzy that TS threw was getting 2 people and full flashing them, and they were getting kills off it constantly. And I was like, oh my god, this is like the best Gecko defense side I've seen. Everything else is working really well. And then they lost that map because their attack side was, so bad. And it was just like, how can you play one half so well and then the next half just looks so lost? It was like, that's their whole season. The first half was great. The second half was god awful. And I don't know what happened in between. I really don't, because when you watch GenG, and you know what, I even did it before this LCQ. I went back just to remind myself, were GenG actually good? Or was it just, were they playing against teams trolling or whatever? Like, what was going on in those first couple of weeks? How were they doing so well? They were good.
Okay.
They were actually good. Like, the ideas, the timings of things, everything that was seemed on point. They looked genuinely good. And I remember I went on with Plat Chat and Sliggy was on there as well, and it was just before the GenG DRX game, and Sliggy was saying that GenG are gonna beat DRX. They're gonna beat DRX. Both teams were undefeated at the time, and he was convinced like they're gonna beat them. And I thought it was a legit possibility as well. Like, you know, they could actually beat this. You know, they could beat DRX, who at the time were considered, you know, still good. And so just I don't get how they've fallen so far. And to me, the only way that they can reset from this is to make changes. I think they must make changes, because otherwise I feel like they're going to enter next year and feel like we're frauds, we're imposters. You know, we know that we can't do this because of what happened last year. They simply must make changes. Now, you've got to keep King.
Yeah.
King is an insane player.
He's so good.
He's so good. You've probably got to keep Meteor. He does overheat quite often still, but he is still a good player. And he will, you know, carry you to maps certain times. So, you know, I still think you should keep Meteor. The rest have shown times when they've been very good, but also times when it's like not that good, right? And so I could see them changing any of those other three, maybe all three, maybe just one of the three. Don't care. Honestly, there's enough decent Korean players out there that, you know, it's not like Japan where, you know, Japan had that problem. I think Korea, there probably is enough decent players to where, you know, you could find someone who, you know, you could bring in and have a good player. Who knows? Maybe even DRX players will be available, you know? Bring in a Zest, right? Bring in someone who, you know is going to be good, right? That's a possibility that will happen as well. So I think that they've got to. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to keep it short. I agree. You have to keep King. He was clearly, I think he was definitely the best player on this team, and he was probably one of the top like 3 or 4 players in Pacific period throughout the year. I think
DRX might try and get him back.
There's no way. I mean, maybe.
They should. They should. If they want to win, they should.
I agree with your assessment of Meteor. I think he, especially at the beginning of the year, he looked like an incredible, like, this is the new truth of Korean Jet, and then kind of petered off. We saw Goddad come in and give this team like a nice boost, but then I guess like the tissue magic wore off, and I don't know exactly. And then again, I have to look at the IGL. It's like, okay, TS he's one of like the old school Counter-Strike players. He was part of like the Quantum Strikers. It was like the Vision Strikers sub team. I'm pretty sure he played with, you know, Glow and those guys back in MVP Phoenix or whatever they were in Counter-Strike back in the day. So, you know, the Korean teams always like to have this old head basically kind of like running the team. And maybe they need that. I don't really know. But certainly changes have to happen, and we both believe that you can't replace King or Meteor. So,
okay,
anyone, yeah,
good. And then our final team who didn't make it, so close, so disappointing for these teams that like got one game away.
Yeah,
is Team Secret, and this is an interesting one in terms.
I love this team, honestly.
Yeah, whether they make changes or not, it's gonna be. I could see them making a change. The problem is, like, I don't know how big the Filipino player base is. You know, if there's enough good Filipino players out there. I mean, they found Envy, who's insane.
Crazy good.
So, you know, maybe there is. If there's another Envy out there, you know, or Envy's got a brother or something, like, bring him in.
Yeah.
Because, yeah. And maybe that's honestly what I could see for them. They're this team that's kind of, you know, they're so close, but not quite there. Maybe... Yeah, maybe like one change. I don't know who you would change though. Like, will Jesse Vash retire? That's another thing as well. Is Jesse still gonna play? Like, how old is he now?
He's like 34, I think.
I mean, that's pretty old.
He's still so good though. Like,
yeah,
but he's super good.
It's kind of it is crazy that he's that old and still doing well. But yeah, who knows what will happen? But maybe they could make a change. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you keep Envy. I'm gonna guess they probably keep Warbirds the coach as well. Yeah. I think Jeremy was kind of inconsistent, but also another one of those players that's probably worth investing time into, because like he has very good moments.
Yeah, I think
And so
Jeff is still good.
then the 3 players that I'm looking at are like Dubstep, Borkham, and Jesse Bash, who are all kind of like the old players
Old
on this
school,
team. And all of them are kind of old, I believe. Like
yeah.
Dubstep, I think, is like 29, maybe. I think he's pretty close to 30 also.
Yeah.
And you might think, like, how can like an old person be playing Jet as the main Jet for the team? But his Jet is like pretty good. Like,
yeah, that's the thing. They're not that bad. Yeah.
yeah. I don't know. I would find it very hard to make changes to this team, but it kind of feels like maybe you need to, because how are you going to push to the next level? Like, this is not a team that looked like their game plans were bad or they were uncoordinated. They just like kind of just lost gunfights when it mattered at the end. I don't know. Like, their firepower is fine, their game plans are fine, everything about this team seems fine, but sometimes unlucky, I guess. Right?
Yeah, they're just like close but not quite there. It's tough. Looking at that game against GenG is just so funny. Looking at the scoreline and just seeing Invi on, like, everyone else is on, like, 50 kills. Like, everyone's almost like on around 50, 40 to 50 kills, and then Invi's just on 94, and he's literally top fragging every map. And everyone's just like, oh, I'm +1, I'm +4. Oh, it's -4 on the series. I'm +47. It's just like, it's so different to everyone else. It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Funny though. But yeah, let's finish then with our final team. Team everyone loves, ZETA Division, who actually did it. I can't remember who we predded. Did you pred ZETA Division to win?
I predded ZETA Division, yeah.
Congratulations on being correct. And you almost... Did you have crew losing to Sentinels? You did, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I had Sentinels crew in Americas.
But the crew
obviously.
prediction was pretty crazy, not gonna lie. But ZETA Division did it. They actually went and did it. And they did it in a very interesting way, where they keep playing Chamber on quite a few of these maps, and it looks really good.
This might be the best that ZETA Division has ever looked, in my opinion.
Oh.
I thought they looked incredible in this LCQ. I thought they were clearly the best team. And I would go as far as to say, I tweeted this out. This is going to sound a little insane, but I think that ZETA Division... Oh, this was before I saw their group. Okay, this is before I saw their group.
I play Fnatic, by the way.
Yeah, this is before I saw their group, which makes me very sad. But I said that one of either crew or ZETA Division will make top 4 at champs. This is how good I thought that ZETA Division looked. I will say, after watching their games, that they were doing the same thing a lot. Like, their 1-4 on Fracture, for example.
Yeah.
They ran 1-4 basically every round. Some team will break that.
Yeah. Probably Fnatic.
Yeah, probably Fnatic. But I thought they looked amazing. I thought that Laz back on Chamber just really unlocks this team. I thought giving 10 a very specific role of being like the second entry duelist. You're playing the Raze, you're playing the KO, you're not doing anything else. Depp is just an unbelievable player. He's so impactful and flexible. And somehow Sugar Zero has come back into Sugar Hero form as well, because he was definitely kind of one of the players that had fallen off, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, this team looks extremely good. I thought, like I said, I think they were easily the best team in this LCQ.
Yeah, it's crazy, and I think honestly they leaned into it. And coming into this LCQ, myself and I think others thought, like, some of these teams, with that chamber buff, is this a way to kind of rejuvenate your team, right? Like, where, maybe you've been struggling on certain sides and whatever, get whoever you had back on chamber, get them back on chamber and just kind of lean into it. ZETA were really, I think, the only team who kind of heavily lent into it. I guess Crew is another example of a team that kind of lent into it as well, playing quite a bit of chamber on these maps, and it worked. Right? It seemed to just like simplify them, unlock them. And I do think as well, to be fair to both Laz and Davies, who were, you know, playing a lot of chamber at this tournament, they were creative with it. Right? Like with old chamber, you didn't need to be creative. You could teleport across halfway the map. Like, you know, you could be anywhere and teleport to anywhere. Like, it's fine. But now, you know, you do have to be a bit more kind of, you know, subtle with it, creative with it. And Laz, to me, he's just mastered chamber. He's just absolutely mastered. Like, Chamber's a pretty simple agent, but the way he like he'll almost always, when he needs to, have a TP set up in a good, safe place, but he's on an aggressive angle. And sometimes it's after picking up his teleport multiple times, right?
Mhm.
So he'll pick it up, and at the right time, he'll be back on that angle, and he'll found a good place to put his TP on. It's like he knows every little spot that's all the good spots to put on. You know, for if he's on his own, defaulting towards a certain part of the map, he knows where to put it, right? Like, and that I think is just such a good skill, and it's so refreshing. Like, you know, I've never watched Chamber before and thought that's interesting, but Laz playing Chamber is legitimately interesting because you can see him, like, you know, pick it, like, you know, now you have to like pick the stuff up, right? You have to pick up this trademark, you have to pick up your teleporter, and, you know, move it around as the round progresses. And it's so interesting to watch him get into the right spots at the right time, and then get a kill and get away, and it's just nice to see ZETA. I mean, we got ZETA and Crew at champs. It's like there are just certain teams in Valorant that just should be at these tournaments,
Yeah.
and those two are just those teams because now, like, they're just part of the story. They're part of the fabric of this game. You know, in
Yeah.
the early years of the game, you know, these were the stories that people connected to. These were the teams that people connected to in the early stages of the game. So it's just great to see them there. And the fact that they stuck with the same roster, right? We're talking about a lot of these teams, like, you know, oh yeah, they probably need to make 2 changes. Oh, you should make 3 changes. And I think most of us would have said, like, ZETA, you know, they need to make changes. And definitely, had they not won this tournament, everyone would have been saying, you guys, please
Right.
make a change. Change something, please. But now it's like, no, this is who you are. You know, this team's been together for forever at this point.
Yep.
I hope these players all one day retire together. You know, I hope that they just play together for 5 years, and then they all on the same day say, "Yeah, now we're finally done." Hopefully, after winning champs, that would be the best story in any game ever.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I genuinely, it's funny because I feel like it's kind of like a meme to love ZETA Division, but I genuinely love this team. Like,
Yeah.
I'm so invested in everything they're doing in this game, and it's just because they're just who they are, you know? Like, so many teams are like, they're trying to copy other people, they're trying to do this, they're trying to do that. I feel like ZETA Division, they like actually understand who they are as players. They know their style, and they will just do their thing. And, like, you know, they'll play the game the way that they believe in. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But if it's not working, they're not going to forget who they are and start trying to copy other people. They're just going to try and, like, improve who they are. And then eventually, hopefully it works out. And it did in this case. And I think that you're correct that this new chamber, here's another bold prediction. I think that Chamber will be one of the agents of the tournament at champs, because I think that he was okay even in his super nerfed state, and he is now back to being a genuinely very good agent. And what you're describing about how Laz plays him, it's like people have forgotten that instant teleportation is the most broken thing in the game. Because Laz, I'm watching him play these angles and fracture and stuff, and it's like people are throwing util at him, and he's just like tucking back in, and he's peeking back out, and they're throwing more util, and he's getting flashed, and he's tucking back in, and he's not teleporting because he knows that at a moment's notice he can instantly be out of there. And I'm just thinking back to how old Chamber was like so oppressive because you could not get him off the angle unless you actually like droned and dogged and stunned and flashed him off of an angle. And that was why he was so oppressive. And that's still possible. You just have to be a little bit more creative with how you're doing it.
Yeah. So that's Pacific. Oh, I mean, it just makes me smile thinking about ZETA Division. I really hope they do well. It's such a shame the group that they got.
The group is so troll.
Yeah. But let's move on then to our final region, which is where you call home, Americas. And for Americas, we've got well, let's start with MiBR. The team that crashed out first, who were the first of many to lose to Crew. I mean, it's tough to say because obviously they were playing, you know, with a sub, coach sub. Like, you know, it's tough to really be too hard on these players. But again, in a region where, Brazil, there is a pretty substantial player base, and there definitely will be players who, you might see are deserving of tier 1. And again,
The
maybe with some other
Union.
teams, we'll see what happens with Sentinels, right? Maybe even Sassy and Pacat are up for grabs. Who knows?
Right.
So it feels like changes are coming for this team.
Yep.
Probably a substantial amount. Obviously, Chosen's, a coach. He's not going to be playing. But then, honestly, you could see a lot of new faces on this team, I think.
Yeah,
And
I don't think anybody's safe, to be honest, on this team.
Yeah. So like every so often you get like a good performance from like one or two of the players. They'd be like, oh, RGL's having a good week, or oh, JZZ or FRZ is having a great week. Like, but then the next week it would be gone, right?
Yeah.
It was never like they could never just get it. And the thing is, they've got a I mean, obviously BZK, knows what he's doing. He's won champs, and he took a loud team with some, inexperienced players at the start of last year. Obviously, he had Sadak and Sassy, but the other three were, like people didn't know them before, the start of last year, really, right? And he took them, straight to Reykjavik, right? So it's not like BZK doesn't know what he's doing either. So it feels like changes are definitely coming for them. And yeah, as you said, it could honestly be 5 changes. They might be one of the few teams, I think, that does maybe go for a full shakeup. But we'll have to see.
I mean, I liked Mariz. I thought that he was pretty good this year, but I just have to really wonder, like, and this might sound a little bit crazy, but I even have to wonder about BZK. Like, I just don't understand how this team was so bad. Like, they have a lot of firepower, but they just look terrible. They looked so bad.
Yeah.
Except against NRG, and the only reason they looked good against NRG is because everybody was hitting shots. But every other game, they just looked like they didn't have any fucking idea what was going on.
Yeah,
like,
they were getting
their plans were terrible.
Yeah, which, I mean, BZK has it is such an interesting thing, isn't it? Because like I said, like you've got a coach who's won champs and been to a final of another international tournament, and obviously Loud have very good players, and have continued somewhat to have success because they got very good players, but still, like it's crazy that this team has done so little, and I guess behind the scenes as well, there's probably things going on there as well. So we'll have to see what happens. But yeah, let's not spend too much time on that team. But let's move on to another Brazilian team, shall we? FURIA, who again played with a sub and actually almost ended Crew's run. In fact, probably should have ended Crew's run because they were up 11-7 on map 3 in a single elimination game. And lost 13-11. As Crew won 6 in a row and then managed to win the whole thing.
Yeah, after this map, I was like, Crew's going to champs. I have no doubt. I have no doubt.
Now, they were playing with a sub, but this is an interesting one. What the hell happens to this team? Because they were kind of good. They were very good at the start of the regular season. Then kind of faded, and they kind of became a bit of a middle of the pack, like inconsistent team. And now you bomb out of LCQ, albeit you were playing with a sub. Difficult to know what happens, really.
And one of the really interesting things about this, and I don't want to point fingers or anything like that, but they were playing the start of the year with Carlisle, their coach, in Brazil, I believe, because he didn't have a visa yet. And then he shows up, and then they do much worse. And it's like, I'm not blaming him for that performance. I think teams just kind of like learn to play against them. But it's funny that they were better without a coach there. When they had Frost, who was like their general manager or something like that, who was was actually on stage with them.
He didn't speak Portuguese.
Yeah, exactly. I think obviously you're keeping Digis in. I think he had a breakout year. And even though his consistency went down, I think a lot of it was just like towards the end of the season, he was like, I have to win these games by myself. And so his performance went down because he was trying too hard and taking too many risks. MW, like, you see the potential. He seems like you keep MW. He's kind of like one of the most popular players. I think, and he's
Mm-hmm.
really good. Khalil, maybe he's on the chopping block, honestly. Like, he came in as he was like one of my picks for maybe rookie of the year after the first 5 games, but he just really kind of faded towards the second half of the season. Um, and Mazen, I mean, I think he was just like a solid role player. I don't think he was particularly good, particularly bad. Um, and it was Quick who's the one who, did he get kicked? Did he get sick? Why did he stop playing? Do you remember?
It was just he was just I think he
He
was
was just
ill.
benched.
No, I think he was just ill for
Oh,
this last game.
health issues. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's hard to say with that because I thought that QCK was quite good, and then you just never really know how much he was contributing to the team's like mental during the games, the comms, that kind of stuff. Losing that because of an external factor like getting sick, it's really hard to tell. I mean, realistically, I think FURIA may have been the second best team at this LCQ, but they just ran into crew.
The best. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I think that is actually a decent likelihood. And again, if they did have the starting five, and even without it, they almost beat Crew anyway. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's possible that is the case, and maybe they just got unlucky with the improvement Crew had. Because yeah, I think they would have beat Sentinels 100 Thieves. I think that they had a pretty good chance of beating Leviatan,
Yeah.
and even Cloud9 with how they went. But we'll get to those teams. And let's go to one of those teams then. 100 Thieves, which is a roster that a lot of people would be interested in. Again, to me, this is a roster where you're definitely keeping Zekken. That's a no-brainer.
Zach, and that's Sentinels.
Oh,
You keep
sorry, we'll get to Sentinels in a second. Okay,
Engagement. Sentinels.
Yeah, Sentinels. 100 Thieves. To me, you're almost certainly keeping Cryo.
Yes.
And then the rest, see, that's the thing. It's kind of the same as Sentinels. And then the rest, we put some question marks by it. What would you do? Tell me your 100 Thieves plan.
Okay, so I actually have a plan of making a video series where I pretend to be the GM for every team in North America, and I go through and actually scout tier 2 players who I would replace these guys with.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Cryocells, safe. I think that he should continue improvement through the entire year. I think that he was kind of the only person shooting back in a lot of these games in the LCQ. And after that, I think that you probably replace everybody else on this team.
Everyone else.
And that might sound kind of harsh, but I think even somebody like Asuna, he was the wonder child. It was like
boy, yeah.
It was like him and Tens. Which one's gonna be like the superstar? Honestly, Asuna, he's had time and he's like a solid player, but he's just not a superstar.
The answer was Demon 1.
Yeah, right. And then I was so high on Bang coming in this year.
Yes,
and again, he was.
I made him one of my demons.
Yeah, he was just an average smokes player. Like he still shows these flashes of brilliance. To me, here's the thing. Here's what my entire video is going to be. Sneak preview for my video on this content.
Here we go.
This team has a chemistry problem. They don't have a player problem. I think the player quality on this team is good enough to be good, but the problem is that Stellar is quiet, Bang is quiet, Cryos is quiet, Derek is quiet, Austin is quiet, and Mike's HD is also quiet. All of them are kind of like monotone. Who's hyping this team up on stage? Nobody. Nobody is doing the work behind, like, in the moments where they go down, where the momentum starts to slow down for this team. Nobody's like, let's fucking go, guys. That was Sean. That was Sean in the timeouts. He's like one of the most positive people I've ever seen. And he was the person that every time Sean called a timeout, this team would instantly start winning rounds. Do you remember that? And everybody likes to be like, oh, Sean was like a genius strategically. And yeah, I'm sure he was giving them good strategic points, but I guarantee you that his energy was driving a huge amount of that success coming out of the timeouts. This team does not have anybody managing the energy. And I'm sorry, like, I'm sure that Mike's is a great strategic person. I've seen a lot of his good setups. Like, that's like, oh, that's a Mike's round. That was crazy. But we've all heard him do interviews. He talks in the same tone of voice all the time. This is as excited as Mike's gets. I actually almost made a meme at one point that was Mike's when he's happy. It was the same face. Mike's when he's sad, same face. Mike's when he's angry, same face. It's like he has like one emotion. It's just the same thing. Stellar, same type of thing. Derek, very quiet. Bang, very quiet. Cryocells, very quiet. They need somebody who is pumping them up. And so, in my opinion, this team needs to bring in Xander to reunite him with Cryocells. They need to bring in Nismo, who is a fiery person, to replace Asuna. And I think they probably could do with the rest of the team as is. I could see them replacing Derek potentially as well with another like cracked Sova player like a Verno or a Trent or something like that. But more importantly than any players they need to replace, they need somebody who's going to rally the troops when they're fucking losing. And they don't have that currently.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to disagree. And again, it's not that being that kind of personality is a problem. Like, you know, when you're talking about like Mike's personality, that's not a problem in and of itself. It's a problem for this team, right? If you've got a team that's
everybody is like that.
Yeah, if you've got a team that's like the opposite, where they're too, you know, unhinged and they're too, you know, excitable, you need someone to just be, you need someone to just be, you know, the calming, like, guys,
right,
chill. Which Mike's would probably be good for. But yeah, they probably do have a bit of that kind of problem. They need like a Zelsis character.
Exactly.
You know, who's like, you know, ready to like, you know, when you're winning, it's like, yeah! And when you're losing, it's like, come on, what do I do? Like, you know, going crazy.
Dude, I mean, you can literally watch these guys like deflate over time. Like they come out, they win a pistol round because their strategies are good, and they lose a couple of rounds, and you can just watch their faces on stage as they just get more and more closed down, and nobody's like, come on, let's fucking win this game. Like they don't have anybody doing that for them.
Yeah. So yeah, probably big changes coming in. Feels like 100 Thieves, just the whole like vibe of like everything around 100 Thieves just seems a little deflated.
Yeah.
You know? Like as someone who got into esports when I did, which was kind of, you know, towards the start of Valorant, you know, 100 Thieves, it was like, you know, they're like a big org. Everyone always talked about how big of an org 100 Thieves was when I first started getting in, and you know, this is my first esport. But now it kind of feels like, you know, they've been completely overshadowed by Sentinels, at least in Valorant.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of feels, you know, like it just kind of feels like they're just like another org, you know.
Yeah.
But when I first got into this game, it was like, no, they're like the big boys, you know. They're 100 Thieves, you know. They're making a ton of money from selling hoodies. Now it just kind of feels like, yeah,
they're like Cloud9, but even less interesting or something like that.
Yeah, they've turned into a bit of a legacy org.
Right.
It feels like a bit. So yeah, they kind of need something to just propel them. They need some of that, you know, that an attitude to them, I think.
Agreed.
But yeah, let's move on from that disappointing.
Bring in Dapper. That was my other player that I thought they might bring in.
Oh, okay. Let's move on though from that disappointing North American team to another one. Sentinels, and I'll start my point that I already did. And this team, you're definitely keeping Zekken.
Yep.
And then the rest, I don't know. Right? What do you do? And I know that some people be, you know, screaming, no, you got to keep Tens, and no, you got to keep Marved. And the Brazilian fans would probably be like, you know, Sassy and Pagata are your best players, you idiots. They've won a championship. You know, but to me, I could see getting rid of all four. The problem is, it's Sentinels. They'll probably need some amount of hype to their signings.
Yep.
So it's like, who do you get? You know what I could see happening?
You think they're going to sign Ye?
I mean, they could sign Ye. What I was actually going to say was, I could see them keeping Tens and also signing Asuna. And having both of them. And even if it doesn't make any sense role-wise, even if it doesn't make any sense, just going like, yeah, these were the two wonder kids of North America. And now we put them together. Like, I can just see it. And Asuna has to play like Smokes or something for this roster.
They bring back Shazam.
Yeah, they bring back Shazam. I could see something like that happening. But what would you do if you were Sen? What would you do?
So obviously you keep Zekin,
Yeah.
and in my opinion, you keep Tens. That might be kind of a hot take, but I think that Tens gets way more hate than he deserves. I thought he was genuinely pretty good in this LCQ. I think the most disappointing player on this team was Pancata. I think
I
he
agree.
underperformed for the entire year. I thought he just never looked as good as he was on Loud.
But he also was changed role for no reason.
He changed roles. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to just like be like, oh, Pancata was bad. Obviously, there was a lot of stuff going on behind that, and having him switch roles and all that. But I just thought, even just individually, he like his shots were not crisp. Like he just looked way worse than last year. I think Saucy was fine. He was pretty good, but also maybe not as comfortable.
Yep,
understandably so. I would be tempted to keep Marv because he's just a good player. Obviously, you don't keep him as your IGL, but this team is going to need a smokes player. So if it was me and I had infinite money, I would probably keep 10, Zekin, and Marv, and I would go out and I would probably bring in John Cutie from M80, and I would, because that reunites him with Kaplan. I would keep Kaplan and Drew as my coaching staff. I think you can't blame them considering what was happening this year. I would get an actual IGL, so I'd probably go out and get John Cutie, and then I would probably drop a bag on like Trent.
Yep, seems like somewhat of a plan. But yeah, I mean, they've got to make changes. You've just got to.
Yeah, I mean, this team will change for sure.
Yeah, 100%. There's no way they don't make changes. And then let's go from one disappointing North American team to another disappointing North American team to then a final team who maybe disappointing is maybe disappointing is the complete right word, but I was going to go more of a serial chokers at this point. Like, what is going on with Cloud9, who, just to remind you, were heavy favorites coming into this LCQ. Heavy favorites. In the other LCQs, I don't think. I mean, maybe you could argue NAVI, but I with how they've looked, I don't think so. But coming into this LCQ, Cloud9 were heavy favorites, and you have to remember they almost made it to Tokyo. Like that game they played against NRG for that final qualification spot, it came down to the wire, right? Went to overtime on the third map, so they were very close to making it to Tokyo and then champs. It wasn't like they, were awful at the very end. They had that one awful game against EG, but then it actually wasn't too bad. But then coming in here against particularly Leviatan, they go 2-0 up, and it's like, well, this game's over. And you know what? It looked very similar to the crew game, where the first map, they win 13-4, and you're like, oh yeah, Cloud9 are clearly the best team in this whole thing. Let's just wrap this up. Cloud9 go on and win. And then they just get destroyed the last two maps. And a similar thing happens in the game that they eventually go out to Leviatan. First two maps, they look in control. It looks like, oh, they're clearly the better team. And then they slowly lose three maps, and it kind of gets worse and worse and worse, including a terrible defensive side on Haven as well. What has gone on with this team? How did this happen? What now for Cloud9?
Oh, man. I really don't know. I mean, the thing is, if you look at it from the perspective of how they came into the season, they had a good year. Third place at LCQ is pretty good, considering that they had 3 players on their roster to start the season. Everybody thought they were going to be the worst team in the league.
Yep.
But after we have witnessed the league happen, and they were 8-1 and one of the best teams in North America, all of a sudden, expectations shift, obviously. You can't just look at the beginning of the season. So, massive disappointment. Man, it's just like there's so many things that we could talk about. I don't know if you saw like the rumor about how Rooney was not scrimming with this team for the last couple of weeks leading up to LCQ.
What?
I saw a rumor that Cupert was actually scrimming with this team leading up to LCQ.
Is there any reason for that?
I don't know. I mean, this could be one of those things where somebody like saw a screenshot of Cupert playing with the team because Rooney couldn't be there for something. Yeah. But I heard this. I just felt like it was worth talking about.
Well, if that's true, Rooney's gone.
I mean, if that was actually true, that is crazy.
That's true. I'm surprised they played with him.
Yeah. So maybe there's no validity to that rumor.
But
But
we like throwing baseless speculation.
we do like basically speculating here for sure. One thing I will say is that, in my opinion, you must keep Zelsis on this team. I think, to me, Zelsis has proved that he is one of the more valuable players that can slot into a team and just do whatever you want. You can run any strategy with him. He's an energy guy. He's a leader on the team. You must keep
any
Zelsis.
role.
Yeah. I also think, man, this might sound a little harsh, but I think he's like the only person that I would say is safe. And the reason that I say that,
Leaf, really.
Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. When has Leaf stepped up when it mattered?
See, I've heard people saying this, that Leaf, and I saw.
When has Zeppa stepped up when it mattered? Both of these guys have been together on the old Cloud9, and they always choked. They've been on this Cloud9, and they've always choked. They've never actually gotten it over the line. Why?
Look, sometimes it's just bad luck. It's got to happen to someone, There's enough teams out there that one team's going to continually keep losing these big games. I would say Leaf, to me, has shown enough that he, in the regular season in particular, was like the best player in all of Americas. And even if he doesn't step up in big games, you still need people to win you those other games.
Yeah.
And he does that. And so find someone who will step up for you in big games, I guess, on this team. To me, I would 100% keep Leaf. And the thing is as well, when we're talking about like, oh, they should make changes, they should make this many changes, and these people are probably gone and whatever. The question is always as well, can you find someone who's actually better? Right? That's always the point. There's no point making a change for a change's sake, right? You've got to find someone who's better, whether that's they're just a better player, or whether that's they fit the team better, or would help, in some other way. And the thing is, you're not going to find someone better than Leaf. There's no if Cloud9 got rid of Leaf, well, it would be good for Leaf because he would make a lot of money probably from the bidding.
I mean, that's the thing. I'm saying this, like, I'm questioning Leaf and Zeppa only because I have not seen them win the big games. I don't want to get rid of either of these players. I think that they have, during the regular season, they both look unbelievable. They look so good. But it's just winning the big games. They haven't done it, and they haven't done it for like 2 years now. And it's like, at what point is it the coaching problem? Like, we know MCE is a good coach at developing people, but does he put too much pressure on people in these big games? I don't know. We've seen the guard have issues with pressure. We've seen Cloud9 have issues with pressure. We know he's very harsh to the players. Maybe that's a problem. I don't know. Obviously, he's a good coach most of the time, but when it comes to big games, maybe there's something that has to be looked at. Again, this is a team, like, I almost want to just keep the whole team. I would maybe look at Jake as a replacement, but again, like, he kind of stepped up in these games. He looked good in the pressure games. I think that Rooney was like one of the better finds, to be honest. I thought he looked really good for most of the year. So who do you replace? Who's better? I don't really know.
I think Cloud9 is always a good example of you've got to peak at the right time.
Yeah.
Cloud9 peaked during the middle of the season. EG peaked at the end of the season. Right. And it's the end of the season that matters. Yeah. Like, no one cares if you peak at the middle of the season if you do bad at the end. And, you can't really choose when you peak. It's not something that's really often in people's control. But, yeah, this was... And the way that they went out as well. It's one thing to just get completely outplayed.
Yeah.
If you play a better team and you just get outplayed. Like, had they, let's say that they beat Leviatan, they go into the grand final, they play Crew, they lose 3-0, Crew look really good.
Yeah.
I'm not sure people would have been that harsh on them. I think people would have just said, well, this is just Crew's time. Crew just, it's just their time. But the way to go out, to be 2-0 up and looking in control and then lose 3 maps in a row and be, a victim of a reverse sweep that doesn't happen very often in Valorant, and is all like, it's so hot. Like, just even have the mental to come back from 2-0 down and even think you're still in this at all for the team who is 2-0 down. It's just so difficult.
Yeah.
But all you need is one map. Like, that's the thing. All you need is one map. And Leviatan, they won split. It was 13-11. It was close, and then it was slowly like, hold on.
Right.
We can win this thing.
But
And then
then
by
on
buying,
Haven, they come out and get
yeah,
plastered again, and somehow
yeah, and
still
somehow
Cloud9
found
loses
it again. Yeah.
it. Yeah.
But then on map 5, it was like there was no way
Yeah.
that they were losing bind. Like
Yeah.
but you could have played that same situation, Cloud9 Leviatan on bind, literally 100 times. Leviatan would win 100 out of 100 because the mental at that point. There's
Yeah.
no way Cloud9 after just throwing Haven. There's no way they're coming back on bind.
Yeah. The last
Uh,
thing that I want to say about Cloud9,
go on.
before we move on, is that I think it's worth talking about how they were winning games during the regular season, which is they were winning a ton of eco rounds. They were
Yes,
winning
true.
all these eco, like Sheriff Stinger. They were constantly flipping the economy early in a game and going off on like some insane like 6 or 7 round run based off of that.
Yeah.
They were a team that was like blowing ultimates when it was like a 2v3 with bad weapons and winning because of that. When that stuff stops working, again, it's like the Talon. It's like the win condition. You know,
Unreliable.
you can hit your 40% win condition like 15 times in a row and look like an incredible team, but then it's eventually going to catch up to you statistically. And it kind of feels like their win condition early on in the season was like getting a little bit lucky to some extent.
That's always a good thing to know for everyone. Like in the NFL, they always talk about, teams that win 1-score games, that will even itself out. Next year you'll lose, the same amount of 1-score games, right? Because those games are close, and normally that means that it's decided by like one small thing. And it's the same with like Derek would be a good example, right? I remember when people were hyping up Derek all the time, right? Including myself somewhat, because he kept clutching. Right? He kept winning 1v1s. He kept winning 1v2s. It's like, well, that's unreliable because you can't decide. There's so many factors that go into like a clutch that are out of your control, right? Like where your opponent is and where they move to, you don't control that, right? Like, and that might be the difference between winning and losing. And the same is maybe true, like with pistol rounds as well, right? Like teams that win a ton of pistol rounds in a row,
It's
you
coming
can be
back.
good. You can be good at pistol rounds. You can be better than average at pistol rounds, right? Like your actual skill with those guns can be higher, but it's not going to be to a point where, you can reliably win. 90 to 100% of your pistol rounds or ecos as well, right? Again, Cloud9 are probably better with stingers than most other teams, right? Like, but it's only going to get you so far. Like you said, like there's only so many you can win before it starts to come back to you. So yeah, teams that win in a lot of these, let's say, unreliable ways, it's always going to come back to you. And it looks like it came back at a bad time for Cloud9. But let's move on to our final team who didn't make it, which was Leviatan, who were a weird team in this LCQ.
That's a good way to put it.
Team. Because their first game, they lose to Crew, and it's 2-0, and they got destroyed. And myself, and I'm sure probably most people, thought, well, Lev are just bad. They just they just started the season again pretty well, and then just cratered. And that's what I was thinking after this game. Like, okay, you're now just cratering. You are just prime fodder for whoever comes next. You're going to lose, right? And I know a lot of Sentinels fans when they played against Lev were probably thinking like, oh, this team, we're playing against this bum team who can't beat anyone now. But no. Then they bounce back. They beat Sentinels 2-0 and convincingly as well, and have some incorrect Fracture. The start of Fracture as well.
Oh, they were
Left
getting
one pissed around, but then Sentinels boomed them, and it looked like Leviatan are done. It was 6-2, and it looked like it was over. And then Shy won a clutch, and then it was like a different team turned up for the rest of the game. And that just goes to show how like things can just change so quick, because. I mean, then they destroyed them on Split and looked really good. Then, they come back, and as I said, like a team that looked mentally boomed managed to win a reverse sweep in a best of 5. Like, how has that managed to happen? But then they lose to Crew. And so it's kind of like you had a bad moment, and then you had some really good moments, and then you end on a sour note as well. So it's kind of like a bit of a weird situation. And again, will this team make changes? They've been good.
Surely.
They've been mid. They've been bad. What happens?
And again, it goes back to the question, who do you replace people with, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, here's the thing. In my opinion, people have been overrating King since day one. I know he's a very good player. I know he's very impactful. But to me, I think it's always a problem when your IGL is your best fragger. And the
Yeah,
reason
I
I
was
say
gonna
that,
say I think he's overrated as an IGL. As a
that's the thing.
player, he's incredible.
That's the thing
As an
is
IGL, he's mid.
that's the thing is I refuse to believe that somebody is capable of top fragging for their team every map while also leading a good game, because it's just there's no way that you can focus on your own fragging and also be managing your team. And I think we see that constantly where crew just runs, or sorry, Leviatan runs the same strategy over and over and over and over again. And yeah, King's getting 2Ks, 3Ks, he's winning rounds for them, but there's just nothing else happening, right? It's just him getting kills kind of in like garbage time almost, to use like an NFL or NBA term. It's like his stats are good, but it's not actually helping them win the game a lot of the time. Yeah.
And also, just to quickly say, like, he's probably also thinking a lot, I need to save this round. So he's probably thinking and calling strats where he knows he can put himself in a situation where he's like the key part of it.
Yeah.
Which then also leads to other problems, of course, because that means that other players, aren't being put in that position when they should be.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. We saw a resurgence of Mazzino against Cloud9, and then he just disappeared against Crew. Takalia had a resurgence against Cloud9, disappeared against Crew. I think Nazwer, he was like fine. He was kind of a decent role player. I think Shy and King are probably the two players that I would say you keep on this roster 100%, and then you kind of you think about everybody else.
Yeah, and again, like, I don't know the Chilean Argentinian scene well enough to like say like, oh yeah, there's obvious upgrades available. But yeah, I think you're right. The IGLing, like, and that's the thing. It's difficult to know, right? Like, is it King? Is it Ono? They run this like very structured style. This very kind of like one direction style, and they clearly know who they like, what they want to be almost. But it's one of those things where, again, like, I'm not sure that it suits the format that they're going to be playing. Right? Like, I talked about it with NAVI that I liked the way, like, their approach I think works for when you have a week between games. Right? NAVI's approach I think works for that. Leviatan is the exact opposite. Their approach does not work very well for when you have a long time in between games. It just doesn't, right? Not anti-stratting a lot, not like just focusing on yourself and playing kind of this very like, we're going to perfect what we do. Well, if you're just showing the same thing over and over again, people will come up with an anti-strat for that very easily, right? Like, they're probably the easiest team to anti-strat against ever, right? Because they just do the same thing all the time. And that doesn't suit that format, right? It suits, again, if they could make it to a Masters tournament, I think that that's the way that, it works for those tournaments, right? Where, again, it's more about, I think, your game and what you're doing. But I do have to wonder, like, it's the one thing that's crazy to me is this, like, they started permabanning Acend. Like, what happened there?
I mean, they literally were 0-8
I know.
on Acend during the regular season.
That's probably like the best example of they just refused to change, right? They were the best team on Acend, and then they just literally stuck with the same thing, and then it just got worse. And you know what? I've said this about DRX before as well. If you're going to be this kind of team that insists on playing in a certain way and insists on focusing on your own game and your own style, and we're going to do this way, what you need to do is you need to find comps that are weird. You need to play off meta, because you can do that with off meta if no one else has ever played against it before. Even if they anti-strat, it's different when you're in the game.
You can't scrim against it if it's a weird comp, basically.
You won't have the scrim time against it, and then you can afford to just lean into it and run similar kind of strats over and over again, because people won't be used to it, because people won't, like I said, like, you can anti-strat all you want, but like, it's going to be different in the game, and something might be slightly off or something might be slightly different, and then all of a sudden your anti-strat doesn't work, right? But when you're playing the meta comps on like every map, and then you're doing the same stuff every map, like, teams are going to know how to play against that. Teams are going to know exactly what to do against that. So yeah, I think the Crew would be another team that my advice would be, if you insist on playing this way, You simply must find weird agents and weird things to do that no one else is doing. Like Loud did at the start of the season at Lock-In by bringing Harbor Viper. Find some weird stuff that works for you.
Yep.
And then just run with it. And you can run with it for a while and have a lot of legs because people, will have to catch up to you essentially. And you can get a lot of success out of that. But I highly doubt they do that because I don't think that these people think that way. I think they just, are very single-minded essentially. So
Yep.
I don't know what will happen to Left. Maybe they'll run it back. Maybe they'll make changes. I could definitely see them making one or two. But again, I don't know who's out there and who would come. But let's talk about the what's the right word for this? The belle of the ball.
Yeah.
Crew Esports.
Crew Esports.
Who somehow managed, after losing 10 games in a row, to win 5 in a row. And looked really good whilst doing it. Let's be real. And not always, they got destroyed by Cloud9 on a map. They lost a map to Leviatan. It wasn't like this flawless, perfect run, but it was the improvement. And I know that people have said, oh, Crew, they weren't that far away. Bullshit. You don't lose 9-10 games in a row without being pretty bad. They were pretty bad. They were pretty bad. Otherwise, they would have won. If they were a decent team, they would have won at least one. This was not a team that was, going to win 6 games. The margin errors are just too fine for that.
So I think you're right. They were definitely bad, but they weren't
0-9 bad. No, yeah, I agree. They weren't 0-9 bad.
Terrible.
But this team that played in LCQ is a team that would have won 7 games or 6 games in the regular season.
Yeah,
Crew in the regular season were not 6-game winners. They were 2-game winners.
Yeah, I think one thing about the Crew in the regular season is that, I think once they'd lost their first maybe 3 or 4 games,
yeah,
I think the mental is just
slump, yeah.
They're just well, we're already out of champs at this point,
Yeah.
We're out of contention for Tokyo. Yeah. We can't make Tokyo. I don't really care. Playing this game sucks. I'm in a different country. Yeah. I hate everything that's going on. I don't really want it's very hard to stay strong through that.
Yeah.
We always knew that Kesnet was really good and these players would have these moments. But then I think the big thing to remember is that once they get into these games that really matter, the LCQ games, there's no teams in any of the LCQs. Well, I guess aside from a Fnatic, or not Fnatic, sorry, Navi, almost none of these teams have the experience that Crew does. You've got Kesnet, you've got Nags, and you've got Klaus, who've just been to every tournament. They have played for their life so many times. So when you compare that to a team like Cloud9, who has never successfully defended their life, they've always lost when it mattered. I'm going to take Crew 100% of the time, even though Nags is a very, very low statistically impactful player. I saw him win a lot of rounds where it's just you're only winning that if you're just confident in your experience of winning the situation.
Turns up when it matters.
Yeah. Yeah, Nags is probably gets more hate on this team than anybody else. Yeah. And when it matters, I've seen Nags step up all the time. I've seen him do it at champs. I've seen him do it at international tournaments. I've seen him do it when he's 9-65 on Jet, and suddenly he just needs to win a round, and he'll just do it for you.
Yeah, and I think it helps that maybe there's less when he's playing now that he isn't playing Chamber a lot, right? When you're playing Chamber, it's the same thing we were talking about earlier, where when you're on that role of you must be the top fragger.
Yeah.
If you're consistently not being the top fragger, people are going to be why are you playing that agent? Right. So now that he's been moved to kind of more of a he's playing a lot of Viper and stuff like that, I think it's more people are okay, I can see the value that this guy brings. But yeah, it's just unbelievable. They improved so much, and to me so much credit goes to their coaching staff as well. I feel a lot of people oh my god, because I'm watching I did a video today about Crew. I'm watching some of their VODs and I'm just their ideas are so good. I mean, I cannot tell in this America's LCQ. Go and watch some of the split attack sides. Oh my god, they're so bad. Oh my god, they're so bad. They don't understand the map at all. With Split's been out since the start of the game, and these teams don't have a fucking clue how to attack this map. Oh my god, they're so bad at it. And I think that a lot of teams, have kind of gone to this double duelist because when you play double duelist, you can just go and hit a site, and it's okay.
Right. You just simplify the map.
Yeah. And I think that that's why a lot of teams have just gone to double duelist, because they don't know how to attack the map otherwise, because they need to fall back on the fact that, well, if we need to, we can just hit the site and plant the spike and then play post plant. But watch the way that crew attack this map. It's amazing. Like, go and watch them against Leviatan. It's like, they'll take different parts of the map. They've clearly got a good idea of where Leviatan are going to be. And yes, Leviatan are easy to anti-strat against, but still, it's like they know what to do. They've got some really great ideas. Again, they've got Davies on this chamber putting his TP in like all these different spots that it's like, oh my god, and they're getting him set up with an op like, at the top of ramp, or in the back of B heaven, where he can TP back to the bottom of mid, back towards the attacker side spawn. Like, just really cool ideas all the way throughout. Their manipulation of the map. Leviatan didn't know where they were going to hit the site. Like, it felt like crew. If you watch that game, like every single attacking round, they're attacking into a site where they're on a 5v2, and there's 3 people on the other side of the map. And like, it was just it's just amazing. And Leviatan, by the end of it, with that last round where Leviatan are like, Taco's just walking up in mid on his own, right? Because they've just lost. They don't know what to do. They're like, this is our last throw of the dice, is just to randomly be aggressive and hope to catch you out. And it doesn't work. And to me, that was like crew just had a very, very good understanding of what they were doing. And it just goes to show like how quickly things can come together. When confidence is high and when, your team play is there. And I mentioned this on Plat Chat as well. You can tell when a team is playing well because they think about the small things. They think about, oh, give this guy the auto for the plant, for the plant. Oh, you go and chase down these kills because you need your one off your ult, right? And we'll stay back, and you'll either die or you'll get that kill, and then you'll have your ult for next round. They're doing that, right? Yeah. Crew in the regular season, they ain't doing that. They ain't getting close to that. But that's when a team is playing well. EG just randomly started doing it when they started playing well as well. And they weren't doing it before. It's just like when you are just confident and the team is playing well, it's like you've got the big stuff down, so you can then just focus on the little stuff. And it's just such an easy sign to me of like, okay, this team is playing well and this team is now good because they're doing these small things that otherwise you would not be doing. And it's crazy that it happened to a team that hadn't won a game all year. Not expected at all, I guess, unless you're Elevated, who somewhat predicted it. But what a story, and I'm so glad they got to champs.
Yep, and now they get to play Paper X in the first round,
which is going to be a banger game. Absolute gigabanger. First game of the tournament.
Perfect segue. Perfect segue. Let's briefly talk about the groups at champs. Just give me your initial take. Which is the hardest group? Which is the most exciting group? And which is the worst group?
Let me just get it up here. So to me, the easiest group is obviously Group B. That's Evil Geniuses, FBX, Foot, and T1. That to me is like, definitely seems like EG got kind of the good draw there, to be honest. So that would definitely be my easiest group. The hardest group, a lot of people are saying Group D, which is Team Liquid, NAVI, DRX, and Loud. But to me, is this not the group of D, instead of D for death, D for disappointment? Like Liquid, do you trust Liquid? If you were like, do you trust Liquid to win a game? If you had to bet your life on it, no one would ever bet their life on Liquid. NAVI, come on. DRX, come on. And then Loud is like, okay, maybe they'll do the Loud thing like they did last year, where the middle tournament they're bad, and then the other two they're good. But what if they don't? And it's like, oh my god. And God knows what will happen in that group. I actually feel like Group A is maybe the toughest group.
I agree.
Like, you've got Paper Rex, who should have something, and obviously very good. Crew, as I just went on a long rant about, are in good form. EDG are good, and I feel like Giants are, maybe not like a top team, but a very solid team, right? It's not going to be an easy game for anyone who plays Giants. It's not going to be easy.
You have to be on to beat Giants, otherwise Giants will beat you.
Yeah, we said Giants are a good team, so to beat Giants, you have to be a very good team, right? Like, so if you're not playing at a very good team level, Giants will beat you, right? And so, yeah, I think that Group A is kind of secretly the hardest group, but obviously the biggest names are in Group D.
Okay, here's one other group I just want to mention. I think Group C is secretly very good. I know that we've got Fnatic and NRG who are just like, oh, they're going through. But I actually think that ZETA in their current form are very strong. And I
Sell me.
I think Billy is actually like kind of a dangerous team.
I haven't watched them, so I couldn't comment, but I hope so.
They are much better than FPX.
Ooh.
They're much better than FPX. They're not as good as Edward, but they have the potential to be sort of like a mini Edward Gaming.
Okay, I'm sold. I mean, to be fair, it was kind of weird with the Chinese teams and how they qualified for Tokyo.
Yeah.
Because they qualified in like their stage 1, and they had another whole like separate tournament after that. And Billy came second in that tournament, but Attacking Soul came second in the first stage. So like, Attacking Soul weren't the second best Chinese team by the time Masters Tokyo started. Basically, Billy were the second best team back then, and still are. Other than Edward, obviously. So yeah, I am excited to see them because, yeah, I'm excited to see. This to me is like this is the actual second best Chinese team. We didn't really get that at Masters Tokyo, so I'm interested to see what they do. But yeah, champs, I think the groups are all interesting in kind of their own way.
Except for B. No, even B.
Well, I think the Group B, like one of those teams other than EG is going to the playoffs, right? Like one of those teams will win those games and therefore will make it. And I think even EG, right? Like they got an easy group. I would have liked EG to have been in a tough group to see like, are they really that good? Right. But I guess we'll still somewhat see it if they completely stomp these teams, then we'll know, like, oh, they're stomping teams, so they're probably not too bad.
There's a non-zero chance that Foot and T1 come out of this group. Non-zero, not super high, but there's a non-zero chance that Foot. And T1
I could see it. Yeah, I mean, if you actually go back to Tokyo, Foot were probably the team that played EG the closest until they got to Fnatic. Yeah. So yeah, I'm sure like if an EG won and they played each other, I'm almost certain I can almost see the like little preview they do with like you can see Calm almost saying like, yeah, we played Foot earlier in Masters Tokyo and they played us really close and they're a good team. Like you can see him, and that was my Calm impression. Not great, but unlucky, I guess.
All right, close out the episode in an American accent that you just did.
Okay. So guys, thanks for watching the episode today. Great episode here with my my buddy, my partner, Elevated. Thank you all for watching. Subscribe to the Acend channel, and we'll see you next time.
What do we do? Win! How do we get it? Fight! Who are we? Acend!